Bonjour les amis des estampes japonaises. Aujourd'hui, je veux vous présenter un artiste franco-japonais. Hey, wait a moment. What is that? I thought that video was in English. Sure it is. But today I want to present an artist who was born in France, I think in Paris, and his name is Paul Jacoulet, and so I wanted to post at the beginning a special greeting for our clients from France. Well, but let's start with the usual beginning. My name is Dieter Vanschura. Just call me Dieter, it's much easier. And I'm the manager and owner of the Artelino company. And we sell Japanese art prints in weekly online auctions. Yeah, and today I want to present to you Paul Jacoulet, an artist who doesn't fit into any of the usual art movements. He's really something very special and a bit crazy. Paul Jacoulet was born either in 1896 or in 1902. Well, there are different sources, and to be quite frank, I do not really know. But one thing is for sure, he died on March 9 in 1960. As I said before, Paul Jacoulet was born in France, and in 1906 he came to Japan with his mother. His father worked as a teacher at Tokyo University. Paul Jacoulet, as a child, he was of poor health, but he had great skills in drawing, in music, and in languages. He was fluent in Japanese, in French, and in English, and already as a young man, he had developed a lively interest in the Japanese kabuki and no theater. In 1920, he began to work at the French embassy as an interpreter. Well, here you see a photograph of the young Paul Jacoulet, handsome guy, dressed in a kimono, a habit, by the way, which he kept until the end of his life. Paul Jacoulet is famous for designs that from the South Sea. Designs that show subjects, mainly persons, well, indigenous persons from the South Sea. And in 1929, he made his first trip to the South Sea. There he made photographs and sketches. And back at home, he created art designs from these photographs and sketches. And finally, in 1934, he made his first woodblock prints. Paul Jacoulet went not only to the South Sea, but also to South Korea and Manchuria, which at that time was regarded as part of Japan, so it was easy to travel there. And also in these regions, Manchuria, South Korea, North Korea, he made sketches and later woodblock prints from these sketches. I now want to show you a few typical images of print designs by Paul Jacoulet, and these images are from our article section. On our website you find more than 1,000 articles related to Japanese prints, and we have 2 articles about Paul Jacoulet, and I now want to show you just a few images so that you get an impression what Paul Jacoulet prints look like. Well, this is the flagship image. Let's go down there. You have the biographical information, and you see these are typical for Paul Jacoulet. Light colors, pastel colors. Well, here, these 2 guys with the black hats, that's from Korea, I think. Let's go down. Okay, well, then this from China, I think, and this from Manchuria. And there on bottom, you see a few examples of the signature and the seal of Paul Jacoulet. The signature always looks pretty much the same, but he used a lot of different seals. Well, those in red, for instance, a butterfly or a sailboat or a peach. And on bottom of our articles, when we have a video, well, we show it, we connect it with the article. This is an old one. We made it 10 years ago about Paul Jacoulet. Disadvantage, no higher resolution, but the advantage there, I look 10 years younger than now. Let's take a look at the second article. Well, this shows what Paul Jacoulet called an indigenous guy from the Aino. The Aino live in the north of Japan. Let's go down. These two landscape formats, that is, I think, from China, that is Korea. And here are two typical designs from the South Sea. Pure products of fantasy, because in the 1930s and 1950s, when he was in the South Sea, the reality was different than what he shows. It's a kind of South Sea Disneyland. Let's see if we have anything more. Yeah, and here the same video. I already mentioned before at the beginning of this video that Paul Jacoulet, he fits in no mainstream art movement. Well, his style is really very peculiar, his own style. Could call it kind of a mix of Japonism and Shinhanga. And as you have seen, most of his subjects are portraits of one or more people, 1, 2, 3 people, and often what he considered as indigenous people. Well, sorry for the expression, but this is how Paul Jacoulet was. And many are from the South Sea, mainly after 1950. Some of these remind me of Paul Gauguin, the post-impressionist. And Paul Gauguin was in the South Sea around the turn from the 19th to the 20th century. And already at his time, the reality of the South Sea was different than what he shows in his paintings. But for Paul Jacoulet, that's pure Disneyland. Yeah, has nothing to do what the South Sea looked like. That is a product of his fantasy. Let me talk a little bit about the techniques that the artist used. He worked with professional carvers and printers, and he used exclusively the technique of woodblock printmaking, traditional Japanese woodblock printmaking technique. He used a lot of lavish techniques that we know from traditional Japanese printmaking, deluxe features like lacquer or embossing or mica. Mica is a white powder or metal pigments. And we know that Paul Jacoulet also experimented with new lavish techniques. He used a lot of different blocks. For one design, if you're familiar a little bit with how the technique of woodblock printmaking works, well, you must know you need one block for each color. And Paul Jacoulet, he bragged that for some of his designs, up to 300 different blocks were used. Well, Paul Jacoulet, in a nutshell, he was a bragger and a show-off, and that was definitely exaggerated. After his death, one of his carvers or printers was interviewed, and he said, yeah, at a maximum we used up to 60 blocks, but not 300. On December 1941, the Japanese army attacked Pearl Harbor. It was the beginning of the Great Pacific War. Paul Jacoulet refused to leave Japan and go back to France. He remained in Japan. Well, what we see here is a self-portrait by the artist from 1942. But the war was a disaster for Paul Jacoulet because all foreigners had left. Also the artists like Elizabeth Keith, for instance, had left Japan. And demand for Paul Jacoulet's prints, well, his market was mainly among the foreigners in Japan. So demand for his prints had dropped with the beginning of the Great Pacific War practically to zero. Paul Jacoulet settled in the countryside in Karuizawa, also to evade the bombing raids on Tokyo, of course. And he grew vegetables and he raised poultry, and he sold the poultry in the black market, and like this he could survive the Great Pacific War. Let me show you another image. Well, that is a photograph after the war. Paul Jacoulet was a rather unusual personality. He was cultivated, he was gay, and he had developed rather extravagant manners. For instance, he wore face makeup, he powdered his lips. But Paul Jacoulet worked until the year of his death in 1960. The artist died of diabetes. Paul Jacoulet had a problem with the art market. Well, usually an artist of his period, he cooperated with a publisher like Watanabe Shotsaburo. And the artists made the designs, then handed the design over to the publisher. The publisher employed carvers and printers, and these carvers and printers turned the design into a finished woodblock print, and the publisher was responsible for selling. Paul Jacoulet, maybe due to his odd personality, he did not cooperate with any publishers. He worked as a freelancer, and he tried to sell his prints with a kind of subscription scheme. But he had apparently few subscribers, and therefore the number of copies that he created were rather small. As I mentioned before, Jacoulet was a show-off and a bragger, and in order to encourage the sales of his prints, he bragged with prominent collectors, MacArthur, Greta Garbo, the Pope Pius XII, the Queen Elizabeth I. This was at least grossly exaggerated, but art historians today believe that he had sent these prints unrequested as presents to these personalities in order to encourage his normal collectors. Take a look, okay, what great personalities I have among my collectors. Let's not be too strict with Paul Jacoulet. This practice of sending prints unrequested is also used by today's printmakers. What they do, not everybody, but quite a few, they send their prints unrequested to museums. The museums don't send them back, they put them somewhere in the basement in one of their drawers together with 10,000 others. And then the artist can add to his biography, to his curriculum, museum collections by boing, 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 boing. Let's not be too harsh with these artists. It's tough to make a living as an artist, and a few small tricks to encourage sales, well, that should be allowed. Today is March 12, 2020, and currently we have this print by Paul Jacoulet among our consigned items, and we will offer it in one of our coming auctions. And I want to use it now to explain to you the scheme of a typical Paul Jacoulet print. Let's start with the title. The title is usually, or I think always, I'm not quite sure, in French here on bottom. In this case, Le Bon's Errant, well translated into English, wandering Buddhist priest. Here, usually also, always in this section, you have Paul Jacoulet's signature and a red seal. He used a variety, a large number of different seals. As far as I remember, they are always in red, and he liked to play on that. Well, there are peaches, there are sailboats. I think this is a lemon, I'm not quite sure. Looks like. Here on the right margin, you have the names of the carver and the printer. Well, the carver was Maeda Kentaro, and the printer Onodera Yoshitsu. Most prints by Paul Jacoulet were published as limited editions, and they have the total edition size and the copy number on verso, on the back side. But there are also prints in the market that do not have on backside the edition size or the edition number. Well, why? What's about that? Well, to my knowledge, and what a renowned and very reputable and knowledgeable dealer told me about 10 years ago, well, these prints most probably come from hoards of the carver or the printer. Hoard, well, that means the carver or the printer, they took a few prints, put them aside, and brought them into the market, maybe later after the death of Paul Jacoulet. Woodblock prints by Paul Jacoulet are rather rare. It's a market niche, but an expensive market niche. Well, on Wikipedia, for instance, you can read that one of his print designs with the title The Parisian Lady was sold at an auction for $25,000. Well, that's true, that's a fact, but that was a long time ago. I also found in the same Wikipedia article, and Wikipedia, by the way, a great source for Japanese print artists. In this article, I found the following sentence, beginning of quote, Jacoulet prints are rare and often sell in the 5,000 to 20,000 range, often. Well, either this article was written quite a few years ago, or it's just wishful thinking by an art dealer, sorry. Mainly in the 1970s and 1980s, it was very fashionable and popular to hang prints by Paul Jacoulet into your office, yeah, or to decorate your home with his prints. And at that time, they were very, very expensive, more expensive than today. But, well, in my view, in my assessment, prices came down after 2000. I now see more a price range of $1,000 to $3,000 for an average print. Higher, definitely, for some rare designs, which are very much in demand. And the price, of course, depends a lot on condition. And there are now quite a few prints with condition problems in the market. And, well, they fetch lower prices, of course. These prints with condition problems usually come from this wave from the 1970s and 80s, when these prints were bought not by collectors, but by people who knew little about conservation of art prints, framed them, exposed them to the sun, and like this they have condition problems. Something else I should not forget to mention, Miles Davis, the author of a book publication about Paul Jacoulet, he mentions that the edition sizes of Paul Jacoulet may not really be reliable. Well, his statement is that not the complete edition size was actually printed. Why? because Paul Jacoulet did not have enough clients. He did not have the demands. So it's possible that the official edition size is 200, but that maybe only 50 were actually printed. Good for collectors. Let me conclude this long video, thanks for your patience, with a reference to a book publication. The title is The Prince of Paul Jacoulet. It's a kind of catalogue raisonné. The author is Richard Miles, and it has been out of print for many, many years, but a few days ago I checked the internet and I found it used for a very attractive price on Abe book prints, and I think also on Amazon. Well, check it yourself. Artelino does not sell prints. Please do not ask us. We offer Japanese art prints, but we do not sell books. So much for today. That has been a long video. Thanks for your patience again. And I wish you a nice weekend and hope to see you for our next video, always referring to Japanese art prints. Goodbye. Thank you.